Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio Network. Educate, enlighten, entertain. On this episode of Lest We Forget, with host Lillian Caldwell, historical, we are talking about how Americans and Ukrainian Americans feel about the invasion of Ukraine and why they may think it's a good or bad idea. We will go and use three different types of resources. One is an opinion, and the other two are from news resources. Interested in finding out more about this particular episode, go over to passionateworldtalkradio.com and click on the blog. And Jeannie White, the station manager, will have written by then the blog up for you to see what it was all about, where I got the resources. So if you want to check them, you can, and additional information that you feel would help you achieve your goal. And before we go and start with the episode, I'm going to do something I usually tell other podcasters is a big no-no. On April 2nd, which is a Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, and on April 5th, which is a Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, PWTRN, with your host Lillian Caldwell, will be giving 2 free master classes on Empower Your Voice, Unlocking Your Podcasting Potential. So please go on over to the links that I provide below and go and sign up so that you will receive and be able to sign up for the information that will enable you to come to the master class. And you can come to both of them. You don't just have to come and you don't get it all, that's fine. And we can also, if you like, provide you with a transcript of the program, but you must indicate which session you came, whether it was on Tuesday, April 2nd, or on Friday, April 5th. Okay, here we go. The first resource. The Russian invasion of the Ukraine has generated a lot of debate in the United States. Nothing is more sacred than the United States honoring its commitments to its fellow Western countries overseas. However, they also managed to tag on other problems that the United States is facing now. And as a result, the first several tries of providing additional aid to Ukraine was shot down. We are talking, of course, about the immigration problem, which we have to discuss previously on other episodes. However, the newest threat, of course, is from Putin himself, who said that if we send troops or any of the NATO allies send troops, that will precipitate World War III, and that will give him permission to go and invade all NATO countries and nuke them if he has to. So think about that. It's what I call blatant blackmail after a child throws a temper tantrum because he can't get what he wanted. The debate in the United States not only has divided the country and the politicians, but the amount of support we should be giving the Ukrainians. Putin invaded in 2022. It's now 2024. And if it's anything like the Vietnam War or Korea or the Afghan War or Iraq, Americans dig in. Of course, we haven't reached the amount and total of years that England did in its heyday, the 100-year war, but we still have plenty of time to fix that. Now, something else to think about, just in case the inevitable happens. The upcoming election is this fall, and one of the former candidates who wishes to become president of the United States stated that he was going to become a dictator. So, how does that represent us in the wide world? Because one of the reasons that we are involved with this war is because we feel that it's a threat to democracy. Well, if the United States itself as a country run by a dictator, I would say that our immediate need would be us, not them. But that's my opinion. Going on with the information I collected and gathered, there have been questions about the extent to which Russia's assault has galvanized public support behind NATO. We believed when Khrushchev was disposed and Gorbachev came in, the Cold War had ended. But that's not true, is it? Not with Putin. He's right up there with Stalin. I remember some of the things that Stalin said about why he persecuted his own people and threw them into Siberia. Another interesting aspect is how President Biden is handling it and his advisors. So there you have it. But the war in Ukraine has just been the final wedge to drive home the point that our two political parties are at odds and at each other's throat, not over the Ukraine war, but also over Israel and Gaza, and what we're doing with England with joint, and I'm not saying exercises, joint efforts of using drones and bombs to get rid of another annoying problem about piracy on the high seas. You'll be interested to hear that a large majority of Americans do support and are following the Russian invasion, according to the University of Maryland Critical Issues poll. The poll was carried out March 16th to the 28th, 2022 by Nielsen, who used a nationally representative sample of 1,320 adults with a margin of error of 2.7%. It found that 40% of the respondents say they are following the crisis very closely, and another 45% say they are following somewhat closely. Here is what the poll took away from the survey. 1. Americans view Ukraine as being far more friendlier to us than Russia, even if some of our population does not consider Russia a mortal enemy, or Ukraine for that matter to be an ally, because there are Russians living in Ukraine who identify with the mother country, with Russia. And then you have the true blue citizens of the Ukraine who consider themselves Ukrainians. 34% of respondents say Russia is an enemy, including 30% of Republicans and 40% of Democrats, while 38% say Russia is an unfriendly country, and 24% has nothing really to say, neither friendly or unfriendly. They're neutral. 19% considered the Ukraine as an ally, while a slight majority of 54% consider Ukraine a friendly country, and 25%, again, neutral territory, neither friendly or unfriendly. Now, a large part of the majority remain opposed to sending U.S. troops to the Ukraine, even if the conflict continues. 65% oppose sending troops, including 68% of Republicans and 62% of Democrats. At the same time, a large majority, 83%, support supplying the Ukrainian army with military equipment, including 82% of Republicans, 86% of Democrats, and 89% of those who were polled support continuing to impose tough sanctions on Russia, including 85% of Republicans and 95% of Democrats. A small bipartisan majority said that if Russia continues its invasion of the Ukraine, they will support a no-fly zone over Ukraine, even as large majorities of Americans expressed concern about the possibility of fighting Russians and of nuclear conflict. 56% of respondents say they support enforcing a no-fly zone over Ukraine, including 52% of Republicans and 61% of Democrats. Despite this view, most respondents also express a huge concern about the United States having a military confrontation with, with Russia. 61% were very concerned. Another 28% were somewhat concerned. Nuclear affairs, heavily. 58% were also very concerned, and another 24% somewhat concerned about a nuclear confrontation. Vestiges of the Cold War. I remember going down to the cellar of our schools with coats over our heads to protect us from nuclear fallout. That is, if the ceiling did not crush us below. 4. Americans view the U.S. response to the Ukraine crisis more favorably than unfavorably, but again, they are divided in their attitude along party lines. 49% say their opinion of the U.S. reaction was favorable, including 31% of Republicans and 69% of Democrats, compared to 31% who were unfavorable. Most Americans, 51%, say the U.S. reacted at the appropriate level, but a majority of Republicans, 56%, say the U.S. has underreacted. 2/3 of Americans do support President Biden to end importing Russian energy, including 56% of Republicans and 80% of Democrats. 5. Most Americans, including both parties, say they're prepared to pay some price in energy costs and inflation for supporting Ukraine, but not in American lives. 73% say they are at least somewhat prepared to pay higher energy costs, including 88% of Democrats and 58% of the Republicans. And some are 65% are prepared to see an increase in inflation, including 78% of Democrats and 51% of Republicans. At the same time, 68% of Americans are not at all, 41% are not much, 27% prepared to accept loss of lives of U.S. troops. This holds across the divide between both parties. But Republicans are much more likely to not at all accept casualties, 47% compared to Democrats, 33%. So what is this telling you? The U.S. policy towards the Ukraine has impacted how us as citizens of this country feel about what is going on. 36% say they now have more favorable views of Biden, while 23% say their views are not affected, while 41% say they have more negative views, including 80% of the Republicans. Well, the Republicans don't worry. They just buy their kids out of service the same way that they used to buy them out of service during the war between the states, i.e., the Civil War. 34% say they now have a more positive view of Trump. Why? All he's going to do is shut down the wall with Ukraine and let his buddy Putin take over and reclaim all the land that he thinks was stolen from Russia. Does this remind you of Germany? And after World War one of the reasons why Hitler said they went to war is because they lost all their land as part of the peace treaty after World War I, and it was Germany's right to take back everything that he could. Which reminds me, that's why he went into Africa. That's why he went into Asia. Sometimes you just don't always connect the dots, folks, and you really should. You should really start learning your history, because history is what's going to dictate to you what's going to happen all over again, lest we forget historical. This has been said many times, many ways. That's what the 100-Year War was all about. Who was in charge? Stephen or Matilda? And whoever held the tower held the people. Atrocities were committed on both sides. The land was destroyed. And who suffered? We did, the everyday peons. So think about that before you allow your elected officials take us into a war, which probably, like Vietnam, Korea, we can't afford to lose, Iraq, Afghanistan. People who align themselves with the U.S., beware. Our track record for taking people who work with us in their native countries is very, very bad. So reflect on which is a safer course for you to take. %, including 72% of Democrats, say they have more negative news and views of Trump. 7, although the U.S. government message on Ukraine has been partly focused on defending democracy around the world, most Americans don't really believe that now the U.S. is a good model for democracy. Think former President Donald Trump. Only 27% say that democracy in the U.S. is a good example for other countries to follow, including 28% of Democrats and 29% of Republicans. A large majority, 61%, says the U.S. used to be a good example, but has been in recent years, including 64% of Republicans and 58% of Democrats. The other question I would like to ask you is, who is going to come to the United States aid should we require it? Who's going to come and rescue our citizen, especially those minority groups, which always seem to be the first to be held up and used to sacrifices for the rest of the country? Just asking. 8, Americans are divided on whether their country should be leading the international opposition to the Russian invasion. Who else is left? India? China? Scandinavia? Germany? France? Poland? Not too many people want to stand up and be counted. The United States is the latest person on the scene, and they have always held themselves up to be adhered to our principles, which we hold true. Read the Declaration of Independence for starts. A large majority, 61%, say that the U.S. used to be a good example. And what do you think that 61% is going to swell to should former president be reelected as president of the United States, who said, "I'll only be a dictator for one day"? I bet they said that in Rome, too, after they killed Caesar and his nephew, Augusta. took the throne and declared himself a living God. 8. Americans are divided. We already said that, excuse me. 9. Overwhelmingly, Americans blame Russia for the crisis, and very few of us blame the Ukraine. However, a significant percentage also blame the US. 98% say Russia is to blame, 29% says the Ukraine bears at least some of the blame, and 36% say the US bears at least some of the blame, including half the Republicans. That's right. How dare they split themselves off from their mother country and declare themselves an independent country? I also would like to ask, is this any different from states seceding from the Union? For example, Texas, for example, California, Florida, Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, to name a few. They should not do this. If California secedes from the Union, put it bluntly, the U.S. is up sugar honey iced tea creek. No other way of putting it. 10. While America and Americans say NATO's expansion played a role in Russian behavior, most don't think this is the key. No, it's not. It's just that Putin wants, and what Putin wants, Putin gets, and don't stand in his way. 38% say the expansion played a key role in the Russian invasion. 41% played a small but not a key role, while 21% said it played no role at all. 11. Most Americans, 57%, say the post-Cold War era has ended. I don't think so. Not when Putin's threatening World War III and saying that England, specifically London, would be bombed first with his nuclear arsenal. But a smaller majority also blame our behavior. 92% say Russian behavior contributed to the demise of the post-Cold War era. 64% said a lot, and 28% say somewhat, while 73% say American behavior contributed. 30% say a lot, while 43% say somewhat. And then number 12 says Americans support receiving Ukrainian refugees in small or moderate numbers, but oppose unlimited numbers. 20% say the U.S. should accept small numbers, 36% say moderate numbers, and 30% would accept refugees without a limit, including 45% of Democrats and 16% of Republicans. 14% would not accept any refugees, including 20% of Republicans and 7% of the Democrats. Again, we have to look back at the question and say, where do Americans go? They can't go to Canada anymore. So where does that leave us? I mean, our original forefathers came from the Western and Eastern nations to escape their world and come to a new place to loot the natural resources here. Think about that. The Ukraine crisis has managed to eliminate or narrow the deep American divide on several issues, including what steps the U.S. wants to take and how much is the public, that's you and I, through taxes, is prepared to pay for confronting the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But on issues that bear directly on our electoral vote, such as evaluating the Biden administration's response and attitudes toward Biden and Trump, the deep divide between political parties seems least affected by the Ukraine war. It is striking that, unlike our political leaders, large citizens, majorities of Americans across the two-party system, no longer view American democracy as providing a good example for the world. It's also noted that a slight majority of Americans do not want to see the U.S. take the lead in confronting Russia. wonder why. And that 1 month at that time, 2022, into Russia's war in Ukraine, most Americans are still reluctant to call Russia the enemy and the Ukraine an ally, which is truly scary. You sometimes wonder what it takes. I want to thank you very much for joining us today on PWR Network, Talk Radio Network. You can listen to this on our blog, passionatworldtalkradio.com, youtube.com/PW Network, underline PW Talk Radio, Twitter, Facebook.com/Passionate World Radio, iHeart, Alexa. We're found in the first 2022 pages of Google. Can't miss it. Also, if you ever thought you would like to become a host on PWR Network, please call us and leave a text. Text us 484-364-1032. Email us pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com. Give us your name. Give us the name of your podcast. Provide your email. And then also send 3 episodes of your podcast. If you are interested in becoming a podcast host, please text us 484-364-1032 or email us pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com. Name, email address, and a possible topic you would like to get on the air with us. And last but not least, the gold nuggets, digital strategy, unlocking your podcast potential, by Vicki Esther Chang and Lillian Caldwell. Check us out on Amazon.com / and put Vicki Esther Chang. Vicki, Viki. Thank you very much for listening. And remember, please keep listening.